Now I'd like to call upon Rabbi Nicole Roberts, and she's Rabbi at North Shore Temple Emanuel. Our topic is the legacy of Abraham in Judaism today. Rabbi Nicole Roberts has served the North Shore Temple Emanuel, a progressive Jewish congregation, since her arrival in Australia in 2012. Originally from New York City, Rabbi Roberts worked as a CPA tax accountant for 9 years and was an active lay leader in her home congregation and movement Reform Judaism before entering seminary at the Hebrew Union College. Her achievements include an Outreach Award for Young Adult Programming, awards for the highest academic standing and excellence in Midrash at HUC, and the Tisch Rabbinical Fellowship, a 3-year fellowship awarded to select rabbinical students focused on rethinking synagogue life for the 21st century. She recently published a sermon urging Jewish response to the Syrian refugee crisis in the Reformed Jewish Quarterly, a journal of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Please give a warm welcome to Rabbi Nicole Roberts.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today. Good afternoon. In the aftermath of September 11th, 2001, an American author named Bruce Feiler, who wrote a popular book called Walking the Bible, set out to write a new book about Abraham, seeing the patriarch as a potential vehicle for overcoming religious violence and ideological conflict, given his prominence and honored stature in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Maybe there was something about Abraham, he thought, that we could all take pride in and have faith in that could link us together. So Feiler went searching to learn more about who Abraham was historically. But what he quickly learned was that religion doesn't really deal in the currency of historicity. Of greater value to the religious soul are things like narrative and symbol and values. It matters less to the person of faith who Abraham really was when he lived than what he has come to mean to us through the stories our people have told about him through the generations, the context in which mention of him is typically made in religious settings, and the values that he's come to stand for. So that's where I'd like to focus today, shedding light, hopefully, on what those stories are from the Hebrew Scriptures, our Torah, that have had continuing resonance or enduring value, and how that currency might be leveraged to achieve peace and goodwill between our respective faiths and peoples. What is the legacy of Abraham for the Jewish people? And given that parameter, what could his legacy be for humanity? So let's start with the fact that some of the Abrahamic episodes in our scriptures didn't really capture the Jewish imagination to the extent that some others did. Outside of their mention in the Bible, they just don't get the airtime that the others do. They aren't associated necessarily with any ritual, alluded to in our liturgy, or as extensively elaborated upon in our later literary traditions. Some examples of these include the verses just before Abraham was called by God to leave the land of his birth for Canaan, which say that he and his family had already left home. We don't hear much about the battles that Abraham fought with other nations to release his kinsmen from captivity, or how Abraham tried to pass his wife Sarah off as his sister when passing through Egypt, and grew rich because of her stay in Pharaoh's palace. Nor do we hear much about the wife that Abraham took after Sarah's death, named Keturah, and how he bore children with her after Isaac and Ishmael. It's important to consider why these bits of the Abraham saga didn't capture the Jewish imagination, or why active choices may have been made not to emphasize them in our tradition. But given our limited time today, I raise them mainly just to show that there is some selection at play, whether consciously or unconsciously, So let's now look at stories that did have greater resonance and which were linked to liturgy, ritual, and legend in order to give them staying power. What were the bits that did endure and the messages that they bear? So most prominent, perhaps, is the story of the near sacrifice of Abraham's son Isaac, a story which rises to prominence through its repeated reading, this time each year on our holiday of Rosh Hashanah, one of our most significant holy days and well-attended holy days of the Jewish year. Abraham hears God's call to make of his son a burnt offering, only to be stopped at the very last moment by an angel sent by God to stay his hand. The enduring message for generations of Jews has been A, that Abraham is a role model of faith and trust in God and of the willingness to answer God's call, and B, that God is worthy of our trust because he doesn't expect human sacrifice in his name. That degree of sacrifice and blind obedience is not required. Faith is important to God, but human life is sacred to God. Another significant liturgical mention of Abraham happens more frequently than just one holy day per year. 3 times a day we begin our tefillah, our prayer, by mentioning the avot, the ancestors, Abraham, his son Isaac, and his grandson Jacob. And why do we mention them? Primarily to remind God that we're related to people that he liked before we start asking for things. But it also reminds us that God fulfilled his promise to Abraham, that Abraham would become a great progenitor, the father of nations. Our very existence today, in other words, is a sign that God kept his covenant with Abraham, and that covenant was a covenant of life and longevity. God promised life, and God delivered. Significantly, our literary tradition holds that both Muslims and Christians also descend from Abraham, Muslims through his son Ishmael, Isaac's brother, and Christians through his grandson Esau, Jacob's brother. So the covenant of life was honored, and therefore God is worthy of our trust, our faith, and our prayers. Aside from liturgy, ritual, of course, is also a great conveyor of meaning through the generations, and Abraham certainly has his place there too. Each Jewish boy enters into covenant with God through the rite of circumcision, just as Abraham circumcised himself and his whole household. Throughout a long and tortured history, we've maintained this ritual, linking ourselves to our people and our oldest Jewish ancestor through this act. Abraham is known in our tradition as being adamant against idolatry, a faithful follower of the one God, breaking with even his own family's beliefs and home in order to follow that God. When we distinguish ourselves from the other peoples of the earth through circumcision, we too affirm our faith in the one God, binding ourselves irreversibly to the fate of all who undertake this powerful ritual. In addition to liturgy and ritual, in Judaism, values get amplified and passed down through stories told by our sages that elaborate on the Torah. These are called Midrash, and they seize upon a few of the Abraham episodes in order to teach a lesson or moral. One is that 3 days after his circumcision, when Abraham is in the most pain, God makes the day swelteringly hot so that no wayfarers will be out wandering. And why does he do this? Because Abraham was so unrestrainedly welcoming and hospitable that even in his great pain, he would have invited them into his tent and not gotten the rest he needed to heal. Abraham is held up as an exemplar of the value called haknasat orchim, welcoming the stranger. Having himself left his home to travel to Canaan, he knows what it is to be a stranger sojourning in foreign lands. And his own tent, as a result, is known for being open on all sides, so as to welcome others in. Another Torah episode that has gained prominence in our tradition is Abraham's negotiation with God over the city of Sodom. God tells Abraham he's going to destroy the sinful city, and Abraham says, wait, but what if there are still some righteous people in the mix? Will you still destroy it? Abraham continues to test God, progressively lowering the theoretical number of righteous inhabitants to see how willing God is to sacrifice them in order to destroy the wicked. The story forms the basis for our people's whole dialectical tradition, the way we study by debating with a partner, and aren't chastised for wrestling with Torah and with God, but rather encouraged to think critically in our effort to arrive at truth and righteousness. Abraham's back and forth with God paves the way for our own intellectual engagement with religion, with our religion, with its teachings, and with God. So what do we distill from Abraham's role in our liturgical, ritual, and literary traditions? What is his legacy, and what is he a symbol or messenger of? Well, first and foremost, the faith in one God. A God who is worthy of our faith because he promises life and continuity, and because he sees human life as sacred and doesn't want it extinguished on his account. Second, while Abraham indeed models a willingness to heed the call of that God and show allegiance to him, the lesson stops short of commanding unconditional obedience. In the end, he's not expected to sacrifice his son, and he succeeds in his debate with God over Sodom. In engaging with God, we need not abandon our sense of righteousness or our intellect. And finally, Abraham represents a willingness to be different or distinct, part of a particular people. He simultaneously stands for being welcoming to those who are different from us, and he stands proudly in our tradition as one who'd rather not see the destruction of an entire city if there are some righteous, innocent people within it. He is, therefore, in a sense, both particularist and universalist, and the common progenitor of three distinct peoples. So I've attempted today to give a sense of Abraham's legacy in Jewish tradition. I would love to now learn what his legacy is in other religious traditions. Bruce Feiler titled his book, Abraham, A Journey to the Heart of Three Faiths, probably because he realized that the heart, not history, is what religion is all about. In our pursuit of peace and harmony, this is the currency in which we must deal. Values, resonances, symbol, story. These will differ for each religion, and these are what we need to study and dialogue about together. We won't get anywhere if we ignore these, because they form the parameters of what's possible in terms of solutions to our conflicts and living peaceably together. None of us can be expected to abandon what holds centuries of resonance in our respective traditions. Legacy, not history, is the currency in which we must deal when negotiating peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Nicole Roberts.